One of the main reasons I came to Oslo is for the unveiling of the statue, the Pillar of Shame. It's a personal to me, and obviously personal to many Hong Kongers. I was there when the Tiananmen protests happened. I marched in the first million Hong Kongers march in May of '89. My father was a founding member of the Hong Kong Alliance that held the vigils for the next 30 plus years. And Jens, who the artist, actually one of the first people that he contacted when he was trying to put the statue in Hong Kong was my father. And so this, I think the whole project of the statue being a test to Hong Kong's autonomy and freedom, and the freedom of expression in Hong Kong, and the fact that it stood for 32 years until the end of last year, makes this, I think, a uniquely meaningful occasion to see a replica and another version of the statue to be unveiled here in Oslo.
You're there at the unveiling today. What kind of feeling do you have? Could you describe your experience being present there today when it was unveiled?
Well, I think Jens and I actually have talked about this. I visited him in his workshop in Odessa, Denmark, a number of months ago. And I think one of the very strange feeling is just how ironic it is that really before last year, very limited number of people even knew that the statue existed. And even people in Hong Kong didn't really pay attention to the statue. It just sort of became part of the backdrop, something that people took for granted. But the act of trying to erase the memory and to ban the public memorial and the display of the statue have given it so much more power over the last 6 months than I think anybody ever imagined. And I think that to see the symbol now being erected here in Oslo, it was in Budapest earlier this year, it's going to be in Prague next week. To see that kind of power, I think it's a feeling of, I think, understanding that once people have tasted and lived in freedom, you can't ever erase that from people's memory and their consciousness. And I think the other thing that was, I think, an overwhelming feeling for me is just to hear the names of people who have been arrested and charged under the national security law, and to know that, over the past 2 years, we've gone from the ability to freely express ourselves, to assemble, to protest, to memorialize June 4th, to an outright ban on any public expression, the removal of the statue, and now most of the people who were involved in the Hong Kong Alliance and other form of political organizing are all behind bars. And I think hearing their name read in front of the pillar, I think, was a powerful moment for me.
You were also here at the Oslo Freedom Forum too. Could you describe a little bit about your experience there and the coverage of Hong Kong activists with Glacier Kwong being there? What reflection do you have?
I think that, I've been a speaker at past Oslo forums, and I think that one of the things that is important and why I think I've been part of it, and I'm glad that Glacier was a part of it this year, is to connect across the communities and movements, right? It's to affirm that none of the aspirations and the experience, although unique to each country, each community, each movement, and even across different individual activists, that there is something that is deeply resonating across those boundaries and lines. And so I think that the idea of, what the Oslo Forum has represented, which is one of the opportunities where human rights defenders and those who have been working in their own way, fighting for their own democracy, their own right to self-determination, has an opportunity to, I think, connect their fights to each other's. And I think that that's an important opportunity, and that's an important space to create. I think that having it in Oslo, I think it's also important. I think Oslo and Norway has a unique place in the world of people's attentions, and the tradition and legacy of the Nobel Prize, and having that, I think, backdrop is important. But I think that, at the end of the day, a forum is just a conference that happens over a week, and people come in and then they go home. I think what I would hope that people at the Oslo Forum would walk away with is not just the sense that, I heard some really great stories and heard some great speakers and got some, t-shirts and books. I think that one of the things that is most important is that it's about awakening people's own struggle in their day-to-day life and where they're going back to. People are asking, what can we do for Hong Kong, and what can we do, for China? What can we do for, and I think we get that question from everybody, wherever we go. Yes, there are things that I think we need, but deeper than that, people need to connect to the fight that is unique to them. And that the fight against authoritarianism, the idea of standing up and speaking up for human rights, and the right to exercise your own political birthright of determining your own future, happens every day, everywhere, for everyone. And I think that I would hope that people don't walk away from the Freedom Forum like this conference thinking about, I learned something more about Hong Kong, or I learned something about Ukraine or Russia. But I think they would take that and make that a piece of the motivation to go back and fight for democracy, human rights, and their own self-determination wherever they are, and to recognize those fights and struggles in their own unique contexts and countries and places wherever they're coming from.
What do you think, on a practical sort of way, that Norwegians can do something about the situation in Hong Kong?
So I think that, I've had meetings, in the past and also this week with members of parliament and government here in Norway. I think there are a number of things that I think are important. And again, I think that there's a sense of despair right now, I think, across many of the communities, people in Hong Kong and the diaspora and even foreign, international support, that feels like we're at a very low point. And I think that is accurate, that is true. But I think that what we need to do is to continue to say that just because the headlines are not on Hong Kong anymore, that it's not featuring Hong Kong anymore, that it's not in the breaking news anymore, doesn't mean that this is over. And for Norway, I think that there are a number of very important things that are happening, right? That the Norwegian government and the previous administration and this administration have continued to discuss free trade agreement with China, which I think in the context of not just a history between Norway and China, but also in the history, the contemporary history of Russia, is clearly a mistake and something that I think Norway needs to reconsider. Not just because of the human rights violations and the atrocities are happening, but it's also because that what Hong Kong has demonstrated to the world is that the Chinese government cannot be trusted to uphold any agreement and treaties. And that is an opportunity for Norwegian government and the people of Norway to stand up and say that we're not going to sign off and pretend that this is not happening because we wanted to trade some more salmons and send more fish to China. It doesn't mean that we cut off engagement. It just means that I think Norway needs to state clearly that it values human rights and that they understand that the days of trusting that free trade is going to lead to freedom in China and in Hong Kong and Tibet and Xinjiang, that is not going to happen. I think the other thing that I've spent a lot of time talking to folks here in Norway about is understanding the malign influence that China has locally here. I spoke with Guri Melby this morning about the specific challenge of security risk and national security risk for Norway because of the way in which a Chinese government use technologies and other economic means to infiltrate and to control and build influence overseas. I was just using an example this morning that NuTech, which is a Chinese military-owned company that sells security screening technology, is the company that supplies most of the security X-ray screening technology here in Norway. It provides the technology for the ports. It provides technology for the airports. I was actually walking into Parliament this morning and looking at the X-ray machine, and I couldn't really get a very good look about the manufacturer, but I'm pretty sure that some of those X-ray machines in Parliament are made by a Chinese military-owned enterprise. So this is not just an issue about what's happening in Hong Kong or in the mainland. I think it's important for Norway to see and understand their own fate and their own interests in this whole scheme of what China is doing. And then I think what we've also seen, and what I think Norway has done, is that I think that there's, again, a very long, deep tradition of human rights here in this country. I think that the people of Norway deserve to know the truth about what is taking place in the PRC, what is taking place in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, in Tibet, and among human rights defenders in the mainland every single day. The people in Norway need to see that so that they can then make decisions about what their response would be. I think that what we've learned in the recent current invasion of Russia to Ukraine is that if you tell people the truth and make it clear about what is happening and the consequences of it, I believe that most countries and people would choose to do the right thing.
Could you describe a little bit about your situation right now and how you feel being able to return back to Hong Kong, and any reflections you have on the future of Hong Kong?
So I had the honor and the distinction of being the first foreign citizen to be wanted under the national security law after it was implemented. When the law was revealed, which was at the same moment that it was enacted, it went into effect in June, end of June of 2020. I remember actually when I first read the draft or the final text, I thought that it was a little bit weird that it has this extraterritorial Article 38 that describes anybody who, it doesn't matter if you are a Chinese resident or citizens or Hong Kong resident, it doesn't matter where you are physically, that you could be prosecuted under this national security law. And I think my first reaction was really just more about how preposterous that they can claim this. And little did I know that about a month later, I woke up one morning in the US where I'm based, and with all these messages on my phone that says that, Samuel, you have made the wanted list in Hong Kong. And my initial reaction, I think, were twofold. One, I thought it was in some way a validation of obviously the work that I've been doing overseas and that many of my colleagues have been doing in fighting for international support for Hong Kong during the last 2 years and 2 to 3 years. But also it confirmed everything that I was trying to say to foreign governments and citizens and countries, is that I might be the first, but I'm not going to be the last. That there is no protection simply because you're not in Hong Kong or you're not a resident of Hong Kong. That when you speak up and you speak for Hong Kong, you could be prosecuted. I never imagined that the last trip I made to Hong Kong in 2019 in December was going to be my last. And probably will be my last for a very, very long time. So there's a deep sense of sadness, obviously, that comes with losing that and feeling like that the idea that people in Hong Kong and people right now who are in courts and in jail, I've had this weird experience of sometimes watching and reading the court transcript and realizing that they're being charged on national security crimes simply for meeting with me in Washington, D.C. or in Oslo or in somewhere else where the national security law has turned Hong Kong into a close, repressive police state in a way that I think is unrecognizable from the inside. And so I think that, my situation again is, some would say, well, it's unique and a little bit extreme to be wanted by the Hong Kong police and then later on be sanctioned by the Chinese government. I was actually at last year's Oslo Freedom Forum, I actually told a story about how that when my sanction was announced, I was telling my family that I still had a bank account in Hong Kong. So I left like a few $100s in the account just as a way of testing to see if they would actually freeze my account. And because I think they are used to, I think the CCP and the PRC government really has this belief that they can control, threaten, and scare people into silence, no matter where they are. But I have not changed anything. I have not stopped doing any of the things I was doing since my arrest warrant was announced. I think that this is, what makes it, for me, still hopeful for Hong Kong, is that while it looks like that we're at a low point and maybe at the lowest point that people have ever imagined, you can't take away, like I said in the beginning, you can't erase something that people have lived and breathed for all their lives. And you think of the analogy that sometimes I use, it's like you telling a child that, after you have showed them a television or a computer or cell phone, that it doesn't exist. And there is no going back. And I believe that even at this moment, where the rule of law has been completely erased or hijacked, the ability to speak freely has been erased, and people are being put behind bars, the reality is that these crackdowns are escalating because they find it more and more difficult to try to root out the consciousness, the aspirations, and the memories of Hong Kongers. And they are never going to be able to do that. So we're in a moment of change. You will not see any more million people marches, but that doesn't mean that the resistance is not going to live on. And I fully believe that Hong Kongers are going to stay in the fight, and there will be new manifestation in Hong Kong, all over the world, of what the resistance would look like.
Is there anything else you would like to say as a last remark? Something that I have not asked you?
Yeah, I think that, we're part of the reason why, obviously, we talked about this. We're here because of the 33rd anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre. This is, it's a personal moment for me because in a lot of ways it was my first exposure, sort of my political awakening as a young teenager in '89. I marched in the rain at that first million Hong Kongers march in May of '89, and I think that what Hong Kong has represented is, in a way, the consciousness, the conscience for the mainland, for the country. Not everybody in Hong Kong actually memorialize or join the remembrance of June 4th, over the past 30 plus years. But what matters is that some people did, and they did it year after year, and they stood as the conscience for a whole nations and people. And the time, I think, is now, the task has now fallen on the rest of us to continue to remember and to serve as that voice of conscience. Hong Kong, I think, is a unique place. It's forged in a way, the Hong Kong that we know was forged in a way that was unique in terms of the international buy-in and the ability for Hong Kong to become what it has become. China would always like to say, and one of their favorite things to counter is that, this Hong Kong belongs to China, and it is their internal matter. I completely disagree. From my own personal experience, from what I have experienced, over my lifetime, Hong Kong doesn't just belong to China. Hong Kong belongs to the world.